literally going to fly through some slides and thinking on capabilities of organization for digital. So we get to hearing John and having a fireside chat. Happy to talk about this offline too. There's a lot here that we're just going to kind of touch the surface of in the 15 or so minutes that I'm going to spend on it. So what I'm going to present is based on some survey, a survey that I've done about what does it mean to be a digital leader, and it's a bit about, it's about performance, and a lot of it is a self-assessment of companies against a bunch of digital capability sets. What the opening piece here is about what is being a digital leader or digital champion get you? How does it actually translate to impact? And what we see is that folks who are digital champions or pursue digital excellence in a systematic way actually do overperform the market in terms of revenue and profitability. Again, pardon me because I am going to fly through this. I'm happy to talk about it with anyone offline. But we see an uptick in revenue generation, and even more so, we see an uptick in profitability because of both the bottom line and top line effectiveness that digital gives companies. See digital fundamentally creating value not just in marketing and sales and products and services, across the whole value chain. Some of the back enablers, HR, finance, IT, and operations, four fundamental types of ways that we see that emerge. One is in connectivity. This is a lot of what we've talked about today with customers, but not just with customers, even with colleagues and with suppliers and supply chain. Some examples here I'm not going to really pause on too much. One is, and the second one is decision making. I am going to pause for a second here because I think this is a little bit less intuitive. That bringing big data and advanced analytics, we talked a lot about this in the customer decision journey, and the way that big data can be brought to bear in kind of the front marketing piece. It can also be brought to bear in some of the back end pieces, and predictive modeling is a very powerful thing in some of the back end enablers as well, including things like how do you actually manage your resources. Actually, I won't pause too long on that. I'm just really aware of time. Automation of processes, so actually replacing some of your activities and labor with technology, doing things like self-service trading, automating things like pricing. If you can do that for your different segments, or crawling the web for pricing and allowing your pricing and promotions to be market responsive without human interaction, for example. These are ways that you can actually take cost and actually be more market effective as well. And then the last way, the fourth way, is actually innovating technology and digital to actually innovate the business model. We talked about that a little bit when we talked about the vision care example. There's some other examples here. Again, I'm happy to talk about it offline, but I want you, the purpose of this page is to broaden the thinking about the kind of impact that digital can have, to really think outside the box about kind of level and magnitude of disruption digital can bring to bear. And when you're really thinking with your teams about innovation, to really be as comprehensive as possible. In order to do this, right, there are capabilities that we need to have in place. The first is really a strategic vision around digital. We see some really common limiting factors when we talk to companies about what's not there. The first is that there isn't a clear vision for digital that's driven from the top, something that needs to be in place. The second we sometimes see is that there's not enough of a focus, right? So if you do everything across that whole map, it's really hard to build differentiating capabilities across that entire grid, right? So understanding which are the truly differentiating capabilities is important. You can invest with purpose. third is making sure there's organization and governance across the digital efforts, so that things are accountability, there's a clear process, and it's clear who's responsible for what. I think you are probably live this. Talent and performance management is critical, right? I'm sure you've listened to this, that it's difficult to attract and retain digital talent, and I will actually pause on the retain piece, right? Because most companies are pretty good at attracting, right? Actually retaining digital talent is a big part of what it takes to be successful here, and that means managing talent, helping develop and continue to excite digital talent and keep them and challenge them and keep them from getting hunted out of your organization and taken somewhere else that's more interesting, and also sometimes even keeping the compensation structure competitive so that they don't get stuck somewhere. And also to measure and incent the right behaviors across the organization, meaning making sure that your channels are not competing with one another, first of all, for credit, making sure that cross-channel behavior is incented, so that so that if a sale is started in digital and finished out of digital, everyone is properly credited for. If a sale is started outside of digital and finished in digital, that it's lifting all boats, right? But when you spend $1 somewhere, everyone, the benefit is realized across the business. And then there needs to be often a change in mindset and behavior so that there's no fear of doing things differently, up to and including the fact that this space changes so fast that failure is not really an you need to be failing or you're not changing fast enough. And if you have a culture in which it's not flexible enough to fail, chances are you're not moving fast enough to move the ecosystem. What I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to skip this and get into this. Gives some, I'm really skipping anything because I'm going to go into the detail pages, so don't worry. What we see in the strategy is that where we like to see strategy in digital insights on the CDJ we looked at before, we see when we survey about 200 companies, of which 70 or a third are digital leaders, champions that we talked about, that only about 24 actually have the, I'll focus on the bottom here, only about 29% have defined their strategy in terms of the customer decision tree. That number is 60% for the leaders, for the digital leaders. And very importantly, right, when we look at relative importance of each phase, so these guys have essentially said, when we look at our business, these are the parts of the business that are important to us from a business perspective, right? So consideration phase is 17% of what's important for our business. The buy phase is 6. So they've said that if we allocate 100, this is what matters to delivering business results. And then they said this is where our capabilities are. Look at the gap, right? So 17% of what's important for our business is in that, and it's do really, really well. 26% is here. We're sort of medium at it, right? These two are pretty important still, and we're happy at it. Look at the balance. So these have actually self-identified. We know what's important to us, but we're still not good at it. This is an interesting exercise to go through for your business and see if you know where you're supposed to be good based on your consumers' needs in order to close sales, close loyalty, and keep your profitability high. Where is your capability map against it? We do that in workshops. Often find this gap. I'm going to take the Burberry example again. I'm happy to talk to anyone about it. Burberry went through a really interesting transformation. What they did was when Angela Aron came into the company, she actually said, we're failing because we're failing on two fronts. One, we're overextended brand, and second, we're not digital enough. And she took two things under her and said, one, to pull our brand back, become exclusive again. Second, we're going to lead digital. She did those two things hand in hand and turn the company around. in a fairly impressive way. It was the down strategic vision, digital vision that really drove it. To the second piece. I want to talk a little bit about how these 200 companies characterize their operational technology. Most of the companies felt like they had pretty good operational ability to put technology out and think through how they were executing, but what they weren't able to do was actually modernize their infrastructure to best in class. So they were trying to upgrade their technology. We're trying to get to what we used to benchmark here was how could they execute personalization across their content campaigns. And the benchmark, 30% of these companies could do personalized content across the bulk of their campaigns, across mobile, across web, across all of the different channels that they're going to market with. This was across the entire group. What we found was that the digital leaders was above 50% could do this. So still not fantastic, right? So a benchmark that still wasn't fantastic, but still substantially higher than the overall pool. I will say what we observed at sort of the objective side in surveyors that we felt like this was overrated, by the way. These were giving themselves a little too much credit on that one. We found when we looked at kind of let's call it leadership mandate of these guys, this was pretty poor, right? So across the broad group of folks, the senior executives, when we talked to them, couldn't actually articulate what top digital KPIs or key performance indicators were across the company, and they couldn't articulate what key digital technologies were taking, trends were taking place in the field. We looked at the leaders, the guys who were actually pushing the envelope in the field, these 70 companies that were having revenue and profit, leading revenue and profitability. This was 65%. And this, guys who had actually budgeted for long-term digital goals, so they weren't short-term budgeting, they weren't saying I'm investing next month, next month. This was 55%. So they were taking a long-term investment picture. They were aware of what it was that they needed to achieve in the digital space. It was a key differentiating factor. I'm going to skip the Starbucks example. Again, happy to talk to anybody about this. And then, again, talent is a place where folks are struggling, honestly. So a lot of digital talent is homegrown, not that that's not a good solution, can be a good solution. One of the benchmarks we used was, were folks actually coming from digital companies, coming with outside expertise into some of the companies we surveyed? What we found across the broad group was 42% of digital talent had outside experience being, and that was from digital native companies. Even among the lead companies, this was only, I think, it was 55, it was in the 50s. And then you can see that some of the tactics that the lead companies were taking were either hiring more extensively from the outside, doing really rigorous training of the internal folks. This was not just by way of digital people. And let's characterize that just for a second. So you can, companies were actually growing internal digital talent, meaning they were tagging someone who was a high potential person and growing them as in a digital role. They were also taking broad swaths of field marketers, field sales staff, and giving them digital 101, 201, 301 to say, literally, we need everyone in the company company to be digitally literate. We need everyone to have a vocabulary, and we need everyone to understand the art of the possible in digital, so that when we get together to do integrated planning, when we get together and we talk about business model innovation, or we get together and we literally just talk about fundamental business strategy, everyone has a basic language, vocabulary, and articulation of what it means to be operating in a digital world. And that is what these guys are doing, lead companies. And then lastly, in an environment in which talent is hard to come by, a lot of the very lead companies are literally saying we are just going to acquire as a module group of literally a whole organization that is a digital talent pool. There's some examples of Amex. And then lastly, in terms of risk-taking and evolving towards and learn culture, these numbers, these may not look so fantastic. We had 30% that was still risk-averse, only 27% that really has evolved test and learn culture. This is actually a pretty improvement over time. That 60% is here and 27% here. It used to be skewed much more towards the top here. In terms of integrated planning, meaning that digital is fundamentally a seat at the table where marketing planning and other sort of planning processes are taking place. This is still pretty skewed, right? So if we look at the numbers, fundamentally, you look from here down, digital is not really at the seat. It doesn't have a seat at the table in about 50%